What if a true investigative report written 10 years ago was suddenly back in the news, coming full circle to the truth? What if the results impact thousands of children and impact autism? Well, it's happening in real time. Today's guest will tell the story of what it means for Americans. Welcome to the Tenpenny Files. My name is Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, and I'm your host. If it matters to your body, your freedom, or your future, we talk about it here. There's something new every day, so please join us daily. We talk about politics and health policy, food, travel, fitness, pets, archaeology, you name it, we talk about it, and very interesting authors, because this show is for authors and documentary filmmakers to give you the cliff notes of what their book is really about. Join me here every day, Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Tenpenny Files, as we hear from voices who've often been ignored, censored, or silenced. And before we begin today's episode, I encourage everyone to become a Tenpenny Prime member. This supports our work and supports our show. Go to primemembership.drtenpenny.com to learn more, and hopefully you will join. One last thing, welcome to all of our regular guests who follow us on all the various platforms. We're really grateful for your patronage, and I'm really grateful for people who've just found this show. We hope we become a regular stop for you. Now, let's get started. Today's conversation is with an investigative journalist, author, and independent researcher, James Grundvig, to talk about his book, Master Manipulator, the explosive true story of fraud, embezzlement, and government betrayal at the CDC, an in-depth investigation into Danish scientist Paul Thoresen, CDC vaccine studies, and alleged financial crimes tied to autism research grants. James, welcome so much to the show, my friend. It's so good to see you.
Dr. Tenpenny, wonderful to be on the show. Thank you very much for having me.
You know, your book was published in 2016 after a thorough investigation of theft, fraud, embezzlement by Danish scientist Paul Thoresen. He was indicted by the DOJ in 2011 on 22 counts of wire fraud and money laundering. Tell us the story of how you chose to investigate him and what you found.
Well, what was interesting was the summer of 2014 when Dr. Brian Hooker recorded the tapes with CDC scientist William Thompson. And what came out of that was what we call the domestic fraud, which became the movie Vax, those recordings. And at the time, me being Scandinavian background, I had talked to Tony Lyons at Skyhorse Publishing and Lou Conte and some others. And we're kind of all fathers of vaccine-injured autistic children to some degree on the spectrum. And we knew about the opportunity with Paul Thoresen, and they figure I was the guy to do it. I understand the Scandinavian culture extremely well. My mom and dad are born over there. I worked 5 summers in Norway, and so the language culture of Norway and Denmark is absolutely the same. The difference is in Norway, it's very mountainous, and people sing like Julie Andrews, and Denmark is very flat, so you get a very flat sounding language in Denmark. Other than that, everything's identical.
Hmm.
But so Paul Thoresen, who is he? Well, let's start off with I call him the accidental scientist. I even do that inside my book, Master Manipulator. He was at the CDC as a visiting foreign scientist from Denmark in 1999, early 2000, when the CDC had a crisis, and we heard about the Simpsonwood meeting that the secret meeting took place in June of 2000, which talked about thimerosal, and they got the entire vaccine industrial complex together from different universities, everything, and they figured like we have a problem. How do we handle thimerosal? They weren't talking about handling the autism epidemic that was beginning to grow at the time. They were only focused on protecting the vaccines. What few people know is that 3 weeks prior to Simpsonwood was a more secret offshore meeting in San Juan, Puerto Rico, at the Hilton Hotel there. There was an aluminum meeting, 2 day session there that was led again by several of the Simpsonwood were actually at the aluminum meeting as well, because aluminum is what, an adjuvant, and it's used in a lot of the vaccines. And so there were actually 2 meetings spaced 3 weeks apart. And aluminum says, hey, let's not, the gist of that meeting in San Juan, Puerto Rico was let's not talk about aluminum. Let's not bring it out to the public. Let them focus on thimerosal and we'll leave it alone. That is literally how they got away with it. Nobody actually knew about this other offshore meeting.
Wow. I don't think that most people know about that. As you know, I've been involved in the anti-vaccine, autism vaccine injury world for almost 26 years now. And I didn't know that. Can you
Yeah.
expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so what's interesting, I actually opened my book with it, right? I talk about it because when I found it, it shocked me too, because I didn't know about it. And I found it back in 2015 after, I had a contract with a publisher and I began my deep research. And so I was making some connections. I'm like, oh, so the industry, which includes the CDC, which I call a wink wink COVID death cult, right? The CDC, they had a problem and they had to go find a solution. Well, the solution wasn't to take 3 years moratorium on vaccines and really do some real testing that Bobby Kennedy wants to do today as HHS secretary, right? It wasn't that. It was, where do we find an existing database around the world and back test vaccines? So if you look at 2000, they had to back test information from the 1990s. So it came down to Japan and Denmark, and actually Denmark had the better database because it extended back to 1968. So the aluminum was a major problem and still a major problem in these vaccines. And what also shocked me, because this is with the exception of Chris Exley out of the UK and others, it is really still not talked about enough in the vaccine autism risk awareness at all. So
You
I'll give
know,
you, go
it,
ahead.
it's interesting. I had a Dr. Chris Exley on my show a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
He's Mr. Aluminum himself, and his history was he started investigating aluminum just because he found it really interesting since he was in high school. And it was a college project that he had that just
Wow.
developed into more interesting things. And he started his investigation about aluminum toxicity by studying aluminum in fish. And so, and one thing led to another. And, now Chris is retired. He's probably 65 or 66, lives
Sure.
in the UK. He said to me, I'm so busy now that I'm retired. I don't know how I ever found time to work. And I've heard that from a lot of people that retire, but his entire world, he has over 200 peer-reviewed published studies on the toxicity of aluminum. And aluminum is the largest quantity of metal on the entire planet, and
Correct.
no good use for it in any biological process, whether it's a fish or a mammal or a tree or a plant or a human. It only causes toxicity. And one of the questions I asked him, James, was I said, there's this big focus on autism and finding out what caused autism at HHS right now. And the one thing they're not looking at is the pink elephant in the living room. Because he said from the time you inject a vaccine that contains aluminum, it takes somewhere between minutes, hours, and 3 days for all that aluminum to go into the brain. And the blood-brain barrier does not protect it at all. So the aluminum goes directly into the brain. They've seen that in mice, rat, dog studies. And then he found it in those brains that he got from an autopsy study and found it loaded with aluminum. And then his focus is a lot of aluminum in Alzheimer's. And he said there's no reason for it to be injected in a human ever. And now if every child gets the full, every single vaccine on that schedule, they get almost 12,000 micrograms of aluminum injected into their body. And I said, and he said, I tried to approach Bobby Kennedy with this. I tried to show him what it was, but Bobby's wings have been clipped. And now we're back to ground zero where you were when you investigated this in 2016.
Well, what was interesting, just stay on aluminum for 1 second. My book came out in May of 2016. So in October of 2016, I decided to pay for myself, fly down to the CDC as a journalist, and go to the ACIP meeting that fall. Right, there's usually two a year in the winter, spring, and fall. And so what was interesting was you have a 2 day summit. I was there on day one, got there early, had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Poloff at wink, wink, kidding. But they vote on different things, right? So they have anywhere from 15 to 20 scientists, institutional experts, PhDs, doctors, whatever, and they vote on different things related to vaccines. That's all they do. And so one of the things in the afternoon was Gardasil. And they started to realize that most of the kids, girls in particular, clearly because it was aimed for them initially, but then the boys, they weren't coming back for the second booster or the third Gardasil shot, right? You get the first, the second, and they weren't showing for the third, so they had a problem. Well, how are we going to solve this, right? And that was the base of the question. And I couldn't believe what they're saying next. Well, the only way we can solve this is if we get rid of the third shot, right? Rid of the third boot, the second boost of the third shot, and we double the amount of aluminum in the second shot. And I go, hold on, wait, what? How does that make any kind of is aluminum the solution to Gardasil? How does it make any sense? I'm not a doctor, but it made no sense at all.
Well, and that's really true for the audience, for the listeners. The first Gardasil that came out was in 2006, and it had 25 micrograms of aluminum per shot. When they increased it, they doubled the market share by adding little boys that we're going to give it to. And then in about 2011, they came out with the Gardasil 9, which then has 500 micrograms of aluminum per shot. And so it sounds like they were saying is that the only reason we're giving HPV injections is to deliver aluminum into kids' bodies. Was that the course of the conversation?
Yeah, and they vote on it, and it was 20 for 20. I've never seen it. It was like a seance to me. You basically just round numbers. They had basically 20 things to vote on in the morning and afternoon, right? 10 each. They have basically 20 people voting, and out of the entire day, 399 votes were yay. Only one abstain on one subject, whatever that was. I've never seen anything like this in my life, and I'm like, these are the people that are protecting Americans' children.
No, these are the
This
people.
is science. This is not science. It's
These
not
are
even
the
politics. It was horrible to look
th-
at.
these are the people that vote to poison our children.
Exactly.
About 3 years ago, I started calling the vaccine schedule the pediatric poisoning program and they just rubber stamp everything, which is what Bobby Kennedy tried to change by disbanding the ACIP committee and bringing in people that were going to realistically evaluate what's good and what's bad. And
Yep.
then
For the
that's
first time.
for the first time ever. And now some rogue judge has disbanded that because heavens forbids we can't have a realistic evaluation of the poisoning program. It has to be rubber stamped to the pharmaceutical industry. And now with Marty McCary gone, from the FDA,
Yeah, he left.
what do you think is going to happen down there? We were
I don't
starting, we were
I don't
starting
know.
to
It's
see some
sort of like
organic
feels
change.
like Bobby is in a corner. So he can't be too, he can't go against the machine, right? He can't go against the beast system, the Babylon pharma, right? You can't go against that pharmakia. But he's going to do something because Thorson is in town. And what people don't realize, Paul Thorson, not only did he steal his money, he actually partook in fraud in many levels in the CDC paid for MMR and thimerosal studies in Denmark in the early 2000s. So him being arrested a year ago in June of 2025 was a big deal. But they didn't arrest him in Denmark because I don't think Denmark would ever have turned over Paul Thorson. Why not? Well, one, Trump at the time was saying, I'm going to take Greenland. Greenland's mine, right? And Denmark technically has some kind of treaty with Greenland, like being sort of like a colony or whatever you want to call it. And so no way Denmark wanted to deal with Trump directly, right? So no way they were going to make a deal with the United States as far as extraditing him. The bigger thing is Denmark's health registry is still used worldwide, and they get millions and millions of dollars every year for countries to come in, right? All the other NHS out of England, CDC still they come in and they back test. They use it to back test these different studies. They use it for abortion. They use it for diabetes, for all kinds of different human ailment, diseases, cancers, and everything. And they're able to track people's health from 68 birth all the way through now. So it is a valuable tool because you actually can see trends if the information is accurate. But if Paul Thorson comes out and says and tells the truth, which I think he's going to do, we'll get in that in a minute. He's going to give information, and this will become public. I don't know if it's in the fall or next year, but it'll become very public. in a way that's going to damage Denmark's sterling reputation and their health registry.
Well, James, it's been 10 years since this fraud occurred, since you did all of this investigation. And as you said, that Thorson was finally extradited by the German government and arraigned for his longstanding fraud that he was actually charged for for of all sorts of cases at the Department of Justice. As a father of a severely vaccine injured son,
Yep.
does that make you feel? And what do you think how do you think that will other parents of vaccine injured kids will respond?
I think it's an amazing opportunity. My son is 26 years old. He never had any impact by the MMR. What he had is what I consider, like you talked about, the aluminum behind the blood-brain barrier, and then thimerosal as well. And so my son was with the regressive form. So all these vaccines over 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, into 18 months, into 3 years, and eventually 3 years in 1 month, he was definitely diagnosed with, autism. And so he was on the autism spectrum. He was showing signs of autism at 2.5 weeks, which is, the parents didn't recognize it. And it's been a very interesting journey. So what I think is going to finally happen, here's the good news. So the bad news is we're reading these headlines of all the shakeup, not only in HHS and NIH and CDC and FDA. You've seen all this different shakeup, so they can't get the right people in place. But I believe there is a going to be an opportunity. The opportunity for Paul Thorson, however this is done, to tell the truth, right? They're going to make a deal because if you put 1 year per count, that's 22 years. So let's just call it 25 years. He's 65 this year. That would make him 90, which means if you looked at a picture of him 5, 6, 7 years ago, he looked his age in his 50s. Now, when he was actually extradited, and ABC News had him, captured the perk walk at the airport, right, coming in handcuffed, right, led by HHS OIG, Office of Inspector General. When he came in, he looks 80, he looks 70, he looks haggard, he looks beat up. So for a narcissist, being in jail is probably the worst thing for them. And now he's here in America. So now he's going to die in American jail unless he sings, unless he tells the truth, unless he points fingers and brings everybody with him. And I'm saying, why wouldn't he do that? There's nothing to stop it. These crimes were committed 25 years ago, 20 years ago, basically from 2000 to 2006. And then Thorson took a little more money in 2008. So you're talking 20 years ago, 20 plus. So there's absolutely no reason for him to hold back. I don't see it. He's not loyal to anybody. So you talk about Dr. Julie Gerberding is going to be named in this. She's a former director of the CDC from 2002 to January 2009 when Obama came in. You talk about Dr. Colleen Boyle, right? She's the Agent Orange specialist that somehow walked away from Agent Orange studies because they actually had the smoking gun evidence about troop movements in the Operation Ranch Hand planes to expose that. And these people don't get fired. In the real world, you get fired for quitting on a study and leaving 20 million on the table. But the CDC doesn't operate that way. So people like Colleen Boyle and others end up getting promoted. I mean, look at Deborah Birx and Robert Redfield, right? They were
Fauci.
right, and Fauci. Well, what's interesting about Birx and Redfield, they were actually caught manipulating data in 1992 and three by two U.S. Army colonels on fudging HIV AIDS vaccines because they needed the fudge numbers in order it works in order to go get the third phase of the clinical trial. They never did. Instead, they got caught. But instead of being in jail, they both got promoted again.
Well, Julie Gerberding, there's a rule inside of the federal government that you have to leave your position in the government for 1 year before you can take a job in private industry, which they
Correct. Of
break that rule all the time. But with
course.
Julie Gerberding in particular, who was head of the CDC, 1 year and 1 day later, she took the a job as Merck International Vaccine Division as head of,
President.
yeah. president of that.
And then she dumped about $2 million worth of shares in 2015, 16. That's in my book as well. So I mean, it's just it goes on. And now she's kind of like the in charge of the I don't know if it's a CDC, but some foundation related to vaccines, of course. So instead of being in retirement, she's still the deal maker, for the vaccine world. It is unbelievable.
So, James, from your book, Master Manipulator, tell us a little bit about what Thorson did to compromise the connection between Mercury and autism.
Well, they got the studies and they thought this would be a straightforward exercise, and then they went into the Danish registry, and he had a PhD candidate scientist named Dr. Christian Madsen, whose name is on both of the main studies that erased the autism signal with vaccines. Right, you had to get rid of the evidence. The problem is they had trouble even back testing the Danish stuff. Right, so they actually had trouble. There was clearly a signal of an increase. You get more vaccines, more risk of becoming autistic. So they had to erase that signal. So we had Dr. Colleen Boyle, who was also in charge of the destruction of data that became the movie Vax. She was in charge of both. She oversaw both. You had Diana Shandell, who was under Dr. Colleen Boyle, and Diana Shandell was Paul Sorenson's 5 year older girlfriend or mistress. And together they went and did these studies, but they had problems. The one study, there was MMR came out and it looked a-okay. And so people actually started researching the actual Danish registry and realized they changed different coding things in 93, 94, 95 as far as recording people, whether they were, treated over the phone or doctor going to their house or they're coming in. So there were changes made. So the study wasn't clean at all. And then the thimerosal was even more problematic, and it got rejected by the New England Journal of Medicine because it wasn't good enough. And eventually, it took a year to get that one paper published, and it took a letter from Jose Cordero, who at the time was the director of the NCB Triple D. Yes, it's a long acronym. Yes, it's a mouthful, but National Childhood Birth Defects and Deficits Disorders, whatever it stood for. And that was launched in 2000 by Bill Clinton, President Clinton, before he left. So Jose Cordero had to write a 2 or 3 page letter. We have strong on this stuff, right? And twisted the arm of pediatrics to publish the paper. Now, what I learned from the late Dr. Ed Yazbak, who had a grandson, I think, on the autism spectrum from MMR vaccines. I went up to Cape Cod and met with Dr. Yazbak in July of 2015 while I was researching a book. And he says, James, there's a problem. I go, what's that? Besides the bad science? He goes, it's worse than that. You're kidding. So Christian Madsen and then a bunch of CDC names and some other Danish scientist names are all listed. The first name's the principal investigator, all the ones that contributed, whether editing, reading, right? And then at the end, you have Paul Thorson on both studies. And he goes, when I learned from Dr. Christian Madsen, who I got to speak directly to me, because I told him I was going to make him as famous as Paul Thorson, and he didn't want no association with the fugitive. He actually told me things that are incredible. He said, number one, Paul Thorson did zero work on those studies. So when I told Dr. Ed Yazbek about it, he says that's the Vancouver Protocol. I go, what's that? He goes, well, there's a international, all institutions science are supposed to follow Vancouver Protocol. If you do no work, he might have got the money from the CDC, but that's not work. The work is actually on the actual study. He never even read the studies. Paul Thorson's a terrible scientist. So he falsely got his name on both of these studies. So those studies, the minute I published this news in 2016 through my book, those 2 studies should have been redacted completely because that's false information. There's no way his name should have been on either one of those, but it was.
And what did the study show in brief? What did they show?
Well, after they've been manipulated and massaged the data, it kind of exonerates vaccines. But if you actually go back and do a real study on it, there's a clear signal in there. And there were emails from Colleen Boyle and others saying, "Hey, what if you change the data here?" So in typical CDC fashion, they would go change the goalposts, change the parameters of the study. not halfway through it, like basically all the way through the study, and like go back and redo this. So the CDC was actually manipulating the outcomes of these studies, which is even beyond false. So this is what we're doing. So COVID has shown there is no science anymore. Not this science that you and I might have grown up and been taught, right? But I'm talking about there's no science anymore. Not in government, not in big industry, not in big pharma for sure. There's no science. It is all to convince people. It's one grand deception, one false narrative, right? Here it is. So it's just amazing. We live in this world, but this is the world we live in.
It's what I've been saying for years, James, that I've said, that the only thing that keeps the vaccine industry going is a mantra, safe and effective,
Yep.
safe and effective. And we have a multi-generational indoctrination of necessity, of which it really isn't.
Not at all.
So it's like, just because we say safe and effective, and because from 1800 through 2026, this is what you do: is you take your kids in and let these people in white coats poison them. That's normal. It's just such nonsense. And you and I have been together and been friends and studying this for a really long time. So
Correct.
right now we need to take a short break to hear from our sponsors. From AmericaOutloud.news. America Out Loud Talk Radio plays the 10 Penny Files on the iHeartRadio network daily, Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. If you've missed any of these great conversations, you can find the 10 Penny Files. Make sure you put the in there, the 10 Penny Files, on Spotify, Pandora, Apple, iTunes, TuneIn, all of my social media networks on X, Instagram, Rumble, and YouTube. And of course, on my Substacks, dr10penny.substack.com, and my Sunday Substack, which is 10pennywalkwithgod.substack.com. The easiest place for all that noise I just said is to go to dr10penny.com, hover over the podcast tab. A drop-down window will say all podcasts. Then you can click on that, and you can listen or watch to any of these great conversations with incredible authors about wonderful books. And so this is really the whole point of this show, is to introduce you to books and to reintroduce you to reading that we've kind of let go by the wayside because of our social media feeds. So at this point in time, we need to take a message where there's become a message from our sponsor. Listen closely, support them because they support us. Sit tight. We will be right back with more from James Grundvig, talking about his book, Master Manipulator, the explosive true story of fraud, embezzlement, government betrayal at the CDC. We will be right back. My supplement line is called the Opti line, and we've been working with these formulations for many years and have years and years of documented success. Our best sellers are OptiMune, OptiVital Cleanse, and we've got a whole line of supplements that you can look at, the ones that I've hand-selected and have used personally with my patients at Tenpenny Integrated Medical Center for almost 30 years. You can find out more by going to supplements.dr10penny.com, and you get 10% off by using our code DRT10 for every day. But if you sign up for the monthly auto ship, if you're going to be on these supplements for an extended period of time, sign up for that, because then you get 15% off. That's supplements.dr10penny.com. Cardio Miracle is the whole health supplement. It's good for your heart, for your brain. It increases nitric oxide. It improves brain health and brain fog. It's really good for everything that ails you. And it's simple to take. It's a delicious powder you put into water first thing in the morning, and it's good for the rest of the day. Go to cardiomiracle.com/DRT to get your supplement today. Well, welcome back, everyone. Today's conversation is with independent researcher James Grundvig to talk about his book, Master Manipulator, the explosive true story of fraud, embezzlement, and government betrayal at the CDC, an in-depth investigation into Danish scientist Paul Thorensen, CDC vaccine studies, and alleged financial crimes that led to autism research grants. Let me tell you just a little bit more about today's guest. James Grundvig is an investigative journalist, author, and independent researcher whose work focuses on public health, government accountability, emerging technologies, and institutional corruption. With more than 2 decades in media and investigative reporting, James has written for many investigative newspapers, magazines, and news sites. He has also produced and been the host of more than 1,200 podcasts and interviews across independent media platforms. And most importantly, James has been a longtime friend and colleague of mine. James, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's just a pleasure having you here today.
Sherry, thank you very much. I think this is a very important story for people to understand. Why is Paul Thorson important today, right? When the
Exactly.
crimes were happening 20 years ago? Straightforward answer. I believe when he spills the beans, when he tells his story in order to shorten that 25, potential 25-year prison sentence to maybe 5 or 7 or something along those lines, I think HHS Director Bobby Kennedy Jr., in my opinion, I think he's going to put that information together. Paul Thorson will be naming people who did X, Y, and Z crimes or, co-conspirators, and which actually the indictment against Paul Thorson from the Department of Justice does say he had co-conspirators. I think Bobby at that point, at some point, fall next year, whenever it's going to happen, is going to then subpoena the names that Paul Thorson points out. You're going to talk about people in the CDC. You're talking about what I call the CDC old guard. They're going to be named. And at that point, Bobby's going to bring them in and put them under oath. And under oath, they can either plead the fifth if they haven't had a pardon from the president, or they can tell the truth. And with this, I think he's going to build, in my opinion, again, a RICO case. Racketeering. Why wouldn't he? So you're going to see something. So even though Bobby, on the surface is getting battered, right, is fighting against this Babylon beast system of medicine, I think he's ultimately going to win, and you just have to be extremely patient. And I think
Exactly.
Paul Thorson is not but is one of the spokes on this wheel of corruption that will actually lead us to freedom of health.
I've had several conversations with Mary Holland, who, for the audience, is the president of Children's Health Defense. She's also a lawyer, and she's worked with Bobby for years. And we've had some offline conversations. She said, "Listen, a leopard doesn't change their spots. Bobby still believes in every single thing that he's ever said and ever
Yeah.
done, and he's in a position where he feels like he has." Even though he's been boxed into a corner and been kind of limited in what he could really do, he still feels like he can make more progress and do better things for the American people by being there than by challenging the beast and getting ejected.
I'm with Bobby 100%. I don't react to the headlines I'm reading. I don't react. Yeah, okay, it's sad that these people are no longer a part of it, right? The deep states, vaccine deep states, what I call them, pushing certain people out, blocking certain people from getting in, right? They do have, they've been, our government's been infiltrated since World War II. Let's be just blunt about it. And you're daydreaming if you think we live in a country of freedom and white picket fences. I mean, that was all illusion. We would infiltrate. We lost World War II. Let me go on a limb here a little bit. Why did we lose? Well, the Fourth Reich Nazis took off all the uniforms. They lost on TV and on the surface again, but actually they infiltrated every part of the United States government.
Hmm.
They set up the United Nations. They basically infiltrated the CIA. They brought MK Ultra with them from Germany, right, to control people who climb up, whether they're billionaires, whether it's three-star generals in our military. This is all out there, and I actually captured a lot of this in my documentary film called Splintering Babylon. And if you go to rumble.com and you type in my handle, Splintering Babylon, you can go find that movie.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, tell us, we're going to talk a little bit more about mercury, James. Even though mercury was taken out of most of the vaccines in 2004, and it still had dribbles in there. And the World Health Organization had five different categories of how they define mercury. Like mercury free isn't necessarily mercury free, and lesser mercury and reduced mercury and all these different things. And so there's all this scam with that,
Yeah.
and they thought that taking mercury out of the vaccine would positively impact health, but yet the rate of autism continues to skyrocket to where
Load.
12, 1 in 12.5 boys in California are now autistic, where they show the chart of when they took away the medical exemptions in California, autism just exploded.
Of course it did.
What did taking the mercury out do anything to change people's health?
No, because number one, it was a lie. It was a white, let's call it a white lie. Let's just soften the terms a little bit. They took it out in some vaccines, but they never took it all the way out. They lowered the amount of mercury in some vaccines. So that's number one. Number two, they started putting it back in. They started putting it in different vaccines, so it never actually left completely. And aluminum, as Dr. Chris Exley and never left vaccines at all because it was never part of the public discussion. It's really rarely part of discussion amongst parents of vaccine injured kids. I mean, I've been part of different groups for, 15, 20 years. So, you hear about once in a while, but you're hearing about thimerosal and MMR all the time. These are the two issues. No, there's more issues than that. So, aluminum is very dangerous. So the thimerosal thing is totally insane. My son is one of the 5,400 cases kicked out of vaccine court in 2011 with the omnibus autism proceedings. Stroke of the pen, right? And I believe there's a lawsuit now against the Obama Department of Justice for doing that because it was all based 100% on fraud. And I think either one or both of my Danish studies through Thorson are actually were used to dismiss the vaccine's injury claims for thimerosal. And so that's how insane our world is. So instead of redacting the two studies on complete fraud, they're still being used to this day to say, hey, mercury is fine and vaccines are safe and effective, as you said, right? We have not changed the story on this, and hopefully Paul Thorson spilling the beans, pointing out everything, will eventually lead Bobby to the promised land of a giant RICO lawsuit against the industry.
Well, I hope so. I hope that at some point, even though I've heard people say, Bobby, really the position that he's in, he's now secretary of HHS. He's no longer an activist. He's a politician. But the one thing that will never change is that he's always a lawyer. And I hope that that is the hat that will be put on, like what you said about the RICO cases.
Yeah, I will tell you. Last summer, when I got a call from a Breitbart journalist, like a week after Thorson was actually arrested in Germany, and I didn't know about it. B, it shocked me. Why did it shock me? It shocked me at the speed in which Bobby moved. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. moved fast. I don't know exactly when he was approved. Like, I don't know if it was March or April of 2025, but you're talking about maybe 6 to 8 weeks later, Thorson's arrested. So that is the lawyer in Bobby. He knows that is sort of like the black box of a lot of the autism fraud and studies. He knows it, vaccines. He knows this. So the fact that he moved that swiftly, he through Mark Rubio, right, the Secretary of State, getting Interpol to arrest Thorson in Germany, which is a much cleaner extradition than Denmark, like I said, surprised me. I didn't think Thorson would be arrested until this year. He was arrested 11 months ago. And now he's actually here. And now he's been moved down to Atlanta where he was initially indicted, right, for his 22 counts. And it's a big deal. He's here already. So yeah, Bobby might not be initially interviewing Thorson, but I can assure you, he's going to line up a lot of the questions for those lawyers for the government that are actually going to do the interviewing. So this is exciting, and you're not going to hear anything about it. You won't hear anything about it until actually maybe there's a trial, or maybe does Bobby even bring him in front of Congress or the Senate at some point in the fall or next year to really expose the entire story for the American people? Can you imagine that? C-SPAN, you actually get the truth. And
They ought to bring they ought to bring in like all of the pro-vaccine senators and make them sit there and listen to it, even if they're no longer in the Senate.
I think that would be great.
Yeah.
I just think it'd be better for American people. And the fact that you mentioned there's 12.5 to 1 to 12 and a half for, boys in California going on a spectrum is a totally insane number. I think new parents really need to hear this. I think we need to put an end to all of this. There is no limit for vaccines, in their opinion. And I know Dr. Stephanie Zenup mentioned that at some point in the future, it's not going to be 2030, but at some point we're going to 2 to 1. And at that point, you're not going to have any reproduction at all because 99.99% of these children do not reproduce. They have no social skills.
It's really true. I was looking for, while you were sitting here talking about your book, I was looking for a slide that I created about the language of mercury, but I can't find it, to really explain to people how the World Health Organization now defines, what mercury free and reduced mercury and all those things are, but I couldn't find it. So it's more important to just talk directly with you. So do you really think, now I hear what you're saying, Thorson is 65 years old and that he's already been charged, which doesn't mean he's been convicted, but he's been charged with this fraud and all these things. Do you think he'll be given an offer to plea bargain?
I think he has to cooperate initially up front. I think then going to see they're going to like test him out and see where he is mentally. They're going to see what he knows. And yeah, once they get a better handle on what kind of witness he's actually going to be, he's going to be represented by a lawyer, right? That's the American way. So he's going to have some lawyer represent him, whether it's his own lawyer in America or whether it's a government appointed lawyer, whatever it's going to be. When they come there, if you're facing 25 years, there's no way he wants that. And
Well,
when you got 22 counts of wire fraud. So the fraud happened this way. Paul Thorson was the rainmaker for Aarhus University, the university he worked at 3 hours outside of Copenhagen. And I went there, where Dr. Dinah Schendel ended up in 2013 after 20 years at the CDC to keep an eye on Paul, still after all these years. And what's interesting is initially Denmark and Aarhus had a 8-year, $8 million grant initially in 2000, another grant in 2007, which was never fulfilled because the whole fraud fell apart a year or two later. Thorson was a rainmaker, but he realized as a foreign visiting Danish scientist, I confirmed he had a bank account at the CDC credit union. There's only 3 branches. Sherry, you and I we're not part of the CDC credit union, are we? No. But we have a foreign Danish scientist that was. So with his conspirators, plural, he was able to get CDC letterhead. He had somebody at the CDC invoice Aarhus University for the American money, claiming whatever. And Aarhus University would send some of that American money back to a bank account in Atlanta. Well, a bank account that Paul Thorson controlled.
wow.
All of this information, absolutely, the Department of Justice and the FBI have 100%, because they wouldn't have made that kind of indictment on him. 22 counts, and they have the exact days, they have exact amounts, and everything else. So they got him, and there's no
So
way for him to dispute it. He's not getting out of the 22 charges. Yeah, he's innocent to proven guilty, but they got so much overwhelming evidence against him in front of any jury, he's going to be convicted. There's no
so
question in my mind.
so 2 questions for you. The first one is, after writing Master Manipulator in 2016, did you ever really think this would come full circle to where he would actually be extradited and actually be held accountable and probably go to trial? Did you ever think that was really going to happen?
I thought there was a potential for it, but then we all got swept up in the COVID lockdowns of 2020, and we had to fight that information war for 4 years, 5 years, even to this day. And so you kind of lose track of it, right? Thorson is no longer important because they're now outright trying to depopulate us with this bioweapon, which is not even a vaccine by any standard.
And then the second question I have is, because you are an incredible investigative reporter. I mean, you dig down into and find things like that meeting in Puerto Rico that nobody knows about, and you really are a very good investigative reporter. And it documented so much in your book, Master Manipulator. Will that become state's evidence?
Some of it will. I'm sure some of it might end up in a RICO case. I mean, I do have 300 sources in it off the top of my head. Um, I write it in a way because I'm not a scientist, and if I try to write on a very high level, people are not going to read the book. The average person is not going to read it. And the audience really is for the my generation that have seen this atrocity, and for new parents coming on board. And it has to be told in a novelistic storytelling kind of way. So, do I take liberties and kind of fill in some blanks and things? Sure, I do. But nothing has to do with the actual crimes itself or the manipulation of science or anything like that. And more focus on the relationship between Diana Shandell and Paul Thorson and things of that nature. So you have to fill in the blanks. But I got a lot of information from Dr. Christian Madsen, so I give him a lot of credit. You're 29 years old. You have this American money. The university was having financial issues, so getting this overseas money from the United States as grants, not loans, grants, was a big deal. So Madsen had to deliver because they wanted to continue using the Danish registry on other studies. So they couldn't kill the golden calf of the CDC. Denmark couldn't. So he was under a lot of pressure. He's under pressure to perform. His thesis was along this line, but under this kind of pressure, he has to deliver a certain verdict, a certain outcome, and he
So
did.
have you spoken to anybody at the DOJ?
I have not spoken to anyone at the DOJ. I actually I take this back. I talked to 2015 during my research. I did talk to the DOJ, but they had nothing, no comment. Forgive me. So I did get on the phone and did that. I also talked to the chief of staff for the former congressman Bill Posey. And at the end of the day, the chief of staff, I forgot his name, but we were in touch quite a bit. And the chief of staff essentially said, at the end of the day, James, the Paul Thorson data studies, this fraud was about a $25 million cover story. Now, $25 million 20 years ago was a lot of money. It's not so much today, but a lot of money back then. And so for him to say that, and I said, yeah, exactly what it was.
Well, I would think that talking to the DOJ now that he's been extradited and to, for because there's new people at the DOJ that weren't there 20 years ago, to get them a copy of your book and say, hey, if you have any questions, call me would be
That's
a
actually not a bad idea. And I would have to go to the Southern District of the DOJ in Atlanta, Georgia. So I could actually do that. They could
I think
actually do what I do nowadays, which is like, all right, summarize, give me a timeline from my book through using AI. So a lot of
well,
good uses
well,
for
you could
AI.
you could you could give them the summary that you wanted them, package it up with a copy of the book and say, "Hey, you're probably new to the DOJ. You may not know all of this stuff from 20 years ago. Let me tell you what actually the timeline was and what actually happened, and I'd be happy to testify."
I love your idea, Sherry. That is wonderful. You know what? And I'm not shy. I am from a New York
I know
originally.
you're not shy.
No, I'm going to take advantage of this, if nothing else, for my son, right? And your recommendation is a beautiful one. I'm going to do it, and I'll let you know how it goes.
Okay, that would be great. After you get that back, maybe you can come back on the show and we can talk about that again.
Sure.
And we've only got a couple of minutes left, but what encouraging words do you want to give to other parents of autistic children now that this is coming full circle and that they may have some justice involved? And is there anything that they can do with letter writing campaigns or phone calls or anything like that to help push this forward?
Yeah. So in a lot of states, blue, red, whatever they are, a lot of states locking the kids' vaccine schedule with going to public school, and you can't go to public school if your kids don't take the vaccines. So you parents need to make a choice in life. I know people work, but now people work at home. Thank you, COVID. That was a silver line. A lot of professionals work at home now. They don't, with bandwidth, internet, podcasts, right, Zoom meetings. They don't need to go to the office anymore. Not like we used to. So COVID lockdowns broke that, which is actually being used against the government.
So what do you
So
say? What do you say to encourage parents? We got 1 minute
So,
left.
so I'm going to real quick to the point. In the 1980s, we had 180,000 children homeschooled. 180,000. Last decade, we had 2 million children homeschooled.
Yay.
This year we got 5 million children homeschooled. Do you see a pattern? I see a pattern. Maybe that's the best way to protect your children is not send them to public school, not get them vaccinated. I'm not a doctor, but in my opinion, you don't know what's inside it. Why would you take a shot? I wouldn't trust anything from a pediatrician anymore. I would never do what happened to my son again, ever. I wouldn't even go for the first week visit. And in fact, I would go as far as not birthing my child in a hospital. Again, I'm not a doctor, but I would find a different way to do it because when my son was born on day zero, they give him the jab in the bottom of the foot, which is for what? Is uh,
It's for screening purposes. So
for
anyway,
STD. No, it's for STD and dirty needles, right? It's what's that?
for hepatitis B,
Yeah, they have a birth vaccine because they know the teenagers will never come back for that vaccine. So they had $1 billion enterprise in 1999, 2000 of
James,
jabbing every baby.
I hate to cut you off here, sweetie, but we're going to have to cut this off. So I really think that people should get involved. They should be, how can they very quickly contact you about this case?
Well, there's one James Grundvig, a Grundvig. That's my Twitter handle. You can go find me at my podcast on Splintering Babylon and Rumble.com, and you can go to Amazon.com and find my book Master Manipulator. It's all there.
Or you can go to bookstore.dr10penny.com where we put all of our guests' books, so it makes it easy to find. So we got a short ending here, everybody. So thank you so much for being with us here today. And James Grundvig and your book, Master Manipulator. I hope that the DOJ will follow through and that everyone who was involved with all of this 20 years ago, seeing their children poisoned by this manipulated studies, will see justice. So with that, I want to thank everybody for being here with us today. We'll see you tomorrow or the next time on the 10 Penny Files. Goodbye, everybody, and God bless.